Have you ever seen a homemade antenna device that started with an old camera adapter? It may sound a little unusual at first, but that small power supply from a camera system can actually become a useful part of a simple DIY project. When a camera adapter is no longer needed, it doesn't have to be thrown away. With a bit of creativity and a few basic tools, it can be repurposed into a homemade antenna setup. In this guide, I'll walk you through the idea of turning an unused camera adapter into a practical DIY antenna device in a straightforward and easy-to-follow way. And the first step here is opening the plastic case of this adapter so we can remove the circuit board inside. For this antenna setup, the internal electronics are not really necessary, so the goal is simply to take them out and keep the outer shell for the next part of the build. I'm not going to throw this circuit board into the trash. Instead, I'll set it aside and keep it for another recycling project later on. Next, I prepared 2 short pieces of electrical wire to connect to the 2 pins of the adapter plug. These wires will act as the basic connection points for the homemade antenna structure. This is soldering flux, a small but very useful material often used in soldering work. It helps the solder flow more smoothly and improves the connection between metal parts. Solder wire is a very important material in any soldering project. It acts as the metal that creates the connection between different components. When heated, the solder melts and flows into the joint, helping the metal parts bond together securely. All right, let's start soldering. After soldering one end of each wire to the 2 pins of the adapter plug, the next step is to work on the remaining ends of the 2 wires. Here I have a 1-2 signal splitter. The plan is to connect the remaining ends of the 2 wires to the side that has a single connector. The other side, which has 2 connectors, will be used later to attach the signal receiving parts. This small component simply helps divide the signal path and also provides convenient connection points for the rest of the antenna setup. The base I prepared for this antenna device is a small rectangular wooden board. Using hot glue, the components can be fixed onto the surface of the wood, so everything stays in place. This simple wooden base helps keep the antenna structure stable and makes the whole setup look more organized. Here I have a piece of coaxial cable, and the copper core inside it can be reused to make two signal receiving parts for the antenna device. The reason this works well is that the inner conductor of coaxial cable is made from solid copper, which conducts signals efficiently and keeps its shape once it is positioned, instead of using new materials. Taking advantage of this copper core is a practical option because it is already designed to carry radio signals in communication systems. By separating the inner wire and shaping it appropriately, it can serve as a simple receiving element for the antenna structure. This approach not only makes good use of available materials, but also fits naturally with the function of the antenna itself. After finishing the signal receiving parts made from the two copper wires, the next step is to solder them onto the two pins of the adapter plug. These two pieces will serve as secondary signal receivers for the antenna setup. They help support the overall structure, but they are not the main receiving element. Later on, another component will be added to act as a primary signal receiver, which will play the main role in capturing the signal. Alright, the two secondary signal receivers have now been firmly soldered in place. After checking everything carefully, there don't seem to be any issues or loose connections. Since everything looks stable so far, the next step is to continue by creating the main signal receiving part for the antenna device. I noticed that the round bottom of a Coca-Cola can actually work quite well as a small signal receiving dish. The curved shape naturally forms a shallow dish, which makes it a reasonable choice for reflecting and focusing signals toward the receiving part of the antenna. Since the aluminum is thin and easy to shape, It can be adapted without much effort. Using a simple piece like this is also a practical way to reuse everyday materials while building a compact mini signal dish for the antenna setup. The main part of the primary signal receiver is still a piece of coaxial cable. This type of cable is commonly designed to carry signal efficiently, so using it as a core of the receiving element makes practical sense. By making use of the inner conductor and the structure of the cable, it can function as a simple but effective component for capturing signals in the antenna setup. To connect the coaxial cable to the connector of the 1 to 2 signal splitter using an F-female connector is a practical choice. This type of connector is commonly used with coaxial cables and provides a simple, secure way to link the cable to the splitter. With the proper connector in place, the connection becomes more stable and suitable for integrating the main signal receiving part into the antenna setup. So now there's only one connector on the signal splitter that has not been used yet. The next step is to prepare a transmission path that carries the signal from the homemade antenna device to the TV. With one end of this longer coaxial cable that I just prepared, I will attach another F-female connector, so it can be linked to the homemade antenna device. This connector will allow the cable to connect neatly with the signal splitter on the antenna setup. As for the other end of the coaxial cable, it will be handled later, so it can be connected to the TV. To connect the cable to the TV, besides the F-female connector, preparing an F90-degree connector is also necessary. This angle connector makes the connection more convenient, especially when the space behind the TV is limited. It helps guide the coaxial cable in a more natural direction and keeps the connection neat and secure. Alright, the antenna device is now fully assembled, with all the parts connected and in place. It's time to take it outside and test it in a real setup to see how well it receives a signal. And after bringing this antenna out for a real-world test, the results are genuinely impressive. What started as a simple idea, using a few reused parts, has turned into a device that can receive signals clearly and quite steadily. Channels appear with surprising stability, proving that even a homemade antenna built from basic materials can perform far better than many people would expect. Projects like this are always satisfying, because they show how a little creativity can turn ordinary items into something genuinely useful. A discarded adapter, a small piece of coaxial cable, and a few simple connectors can come together to create a working antenna that actually does the job. Sometimes the most interesting DIY results come from experimenting with what we already have. If you found this project interesting, you might want to try building one yourself and see how it performs in your area. And if you have ideas to improve a design or make it work even better, feel free to share them. I'd really like to hear what kind of results you get and what creative solutions you come up with.